Welcome to this explainer. Listen, if you've ever been part of a team that spent months, or let's be honest, maybe even years, building something, only to realize at the very end that absolutely nobody wanted to actually use it, well, you are definitely not alone. Today, we're tackling a massive, shared frustration across the tech and corporate worlds. We're going to look at exactly why software projects are so notoriously difficult to deliver on time, on budget, and with the actual features people need. We'll break down the traditional ways of working, look at why they fall apart so often, and then explore how modern frameworks have stepped in to completely revolutionize how we build.
Okay, let's jump right in with the hilariously familiar scenario, the classic tree swing. It brilliantly captures how a customer's simple, well-intentioned request gets completely warped through that broken telephone game of project management. The customer just asks for a basic three-rung swing hanging from a branch. But by the time the project leader interprets it, the analyst overdesigns it, and the programmer writes the code, it turns into a completely unrecognizable, unworkable mess. And the real tragedy here? When you look at what the customer actually needed all along, it was literally just a simple tire hanging from a rope. It's the perfect metaphor for that massive disconnect between a requested concept and the final built reality.
So this universal frustration brings up a pretty critical question. Why is it so incredibly hard to get software right? I mean, why can't we simply write perfect, comprehensive documents right up front to avoid these disasters altogether? We've all been there, right? Staring at those massive 100-page business requirement documents. The theory used to be that if we just spent enough time detailing every single possible feature on paper before writing a single line of code, we could just hand that document off and get exactly what we wanted. But here's the thing, we've tried that approach for decades. We've spent countless months trying to predict the future on paper, and it just consistently fails. And the stakes here are literally massive. The Standish Group actually conducted a huge study tracking tens of thousands of projects, and what they found was wild. A staggering 29% of traditional software projects just failed outright. Now, we aren't talking about a delayed launch or going a little bit over budget here. We're talking about complete and total cancellations, millions of dollars and thousands of hours completely vaporized, without a single usable product to show for it. And honestly, of the projects that actually did manage to survive to launch, over 60% blew entirely past their initial budgets.
But honestly, the absolute most shocking reality is what happens to the software that actually gets finished. Think about the apps you use every single day. The data shows that an enormous 64% of all requested features built in traditional projects are either rarely or literally never used by the end consumer. That is a staggering amount of wasted effort. It means teams are spending over half their time designing, coding, testing, and maintaining buttons and menus that absolutely no one is clicking on. And why? All because a rigid plan dictated that they had to build it.
So to understand why these spectacular failures keep happening, we have to fundamentally shift our mental model. We need to stop comparing new product development to predictable mass manufacturing. Making software is not like manufacturing a million identical cell phones on a factory assembly line. In an established factory, everything is highly predictable, right? You know exactly how much a screw costs, you know exactly how long it takes to attach. But software? Software is inherently inventive. It's essentially custom-built every single time. It involves massive amounts of novelty, creativity, and trial and error. There are rarely identical past cases you can just copy-paste to get perfect estimates.
Now, the old plan-driven waterfall model. Look, it meant well. It tried to bring order to the chaos of development by treating code exactly like that predictable assembly line. It forced a rigid, step-by-step progression. You gather all your requirements first, lock them down, then do all the design, then all the development, and finally, months later, you test it for one massive launch. But doing it that way creates an incredibly fragile system. It assumes you magically possess perfect knowledge on day one and that your customer's business needs won't change over the entire year it takes to build the thing. And we all know the second a single requirement inevitably changes, the whole plan just shatters.
And this dilemma is perfectly captured by a really cool concept known as the cone of uncertainty. It's basically a foundational rule of project management that says, you know the absolute least about a project on its very first day. It is virtually impossible to accurately estimate effort, cost, and scope when everything is just a vague idea. At the very beginning, the variability of what things will actually cost or how long they'll take is just massive. As time goes on and you start actually building, you gather real data, and that uncertainty naturally narrows. But traditional upfront methods, they demand strict budgets and unmovable timelines right at the very beginning, exactly when uncertainty is at its absolute highest peak. It's crazy. Which naturally leads us to a fantastic rule of thumb known as the I'll know it when I see it law, or IKWSI for short. This law asserts that customers can really only articulate what they truly want after they interact with working, functional software. The details of a digital product are just way too complex for human beings to conceptualize perfectly from a text document. It's exactly like remodeling a kitchen. You can stare at blueprints all day long, but you don't really know if the counter space works until you're physically standing in it. Software is the exact same way. As users see a product develop, they naturally change their minds, and new, much better ideas emerge.
And that brings us to the crucial pivot, Agile methodology. Now, Agile isn't just some corporate buzzword. It was a fundamental rebellion against that rigid upfront planning that was failing us so spectacularly. It embraces the uncomfortable reality that change is inevitable, period. Instead of constantly fighting against evolving requirements, Agile steps in to replace that strict sequential planning with a highly flexible, adaptable approach. It shifts the entire focus away from blindly following a massive document and instead prioritizes continuous customer feedback and the rapid delivery of actual working solutions.
Instead of assuming we can draw a perfectly straight line to success, Agile operates on an empirical loop. Because you're working in this environment of high variability and invention, you have to rely on continuous, repeated cycles of discovery. You identify a very small piece of work, you plan it quickly, you build it, you measure how it actually performs in reality, and then you learn from it. Then, you immediately feed that learning right into the next small cycle. You are making critical decisions based on the actual realities you're observing in the project today, rather than stubbornly following a theoretical plan written by a committee 6 months ago. Think about what this actually feels like for the team. Instead of everyone holding their collective breath for months or years, hoping against hope that the massive final release is what the market actually wanted, Agile breaks time into short, manageable blocks called sprints. Every couple of weeks you plan, create, review, and release an intermediate, usable piece of software. You are constantly putting real functionality right into the user's hands. This means the customer gets to see the software evolve step by step, allowing them to steer the ship organically as their own understanding of their needs becomes clearer.
And by working this way, you fundamentally flip the script on project risk. You aren't just guessing what the market wants, you are actively adapting to it in real time through responsive planning. This continuous, hands-on business output keeps stakeholders super engaged because they can interact with the product immediately. On top of that, it completely changes team dynamics. It empowers self-motivated teams to take real ownership and constantly check the measurable quality of their code. Ultimately, this tight feedback loop is exactly how you maximize your resources and finally eliminate that massive 64% of features that nobody was ever going to use anyway.
And look, the undeniable data completely backs this up. Going back to the Standish Group's metrics, the shift in outcomes is absolutely staggering. Agile projects boast a 42% clear success rate. That's more than triple the 13% success rate of traditional waterfall methods. Furthermore, those traditional projects fail outright at more than double the rate of Agile ones. The proof of the philosophy is literally written right here in the numbers. Adapting to change, leaning into user feedback, and building in small increments simply works incredibly better than fighting against uncertainty.
And the coolest part? The methodology isn't standing still. It's constantly improving. Looking ahead, Agile is already evolving into exciting new post-Agile frameworks that can tackle even more complexities. Teams are integrating artificial intelligence for predictive planning, helping them flag roadblocks before they even happen, and using machine learning to drastically speed up bug detection. They're blending Agile execution with design thinking to build products with far deeper empathy for the end user. And they're using continuous discovery techniques to validate every single design decision with real-time feedback while the development is still going on.
However, a massive success rate does come with a pretty dangerous trap. It is incredibly tempting for an organization that lacks a strategy, randomly changes their minds all the time, and fails repeatedly to just look at their management and say, hey, relax, we're just being agile. We have to be careful. Organizations cannot simply adopt the terminology as a trendy buzzword to cover up a complete lack of planning or business direction. True Agile actually requires immense discipline, constant communication, and rigorous testing. It is a highly structured framework for managing unpredictability. It is absolutely not an excuse for organizational chaos.
So I'm going to leave you with this provocative thought to chew on today. Take a real hard look at your team or your business. Are you genuinely adapting, continuously measuring, and intensely collaborating to deliver real, usable value to your customers? Or are you just using the word agile to mask a fundamental lack of strategy? It's a vital distinction, and it's one that can completely determine the success or failure of your next big initiative. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer today, and remember, always keep questioning how you build.